Welcome as we begin our exploration of the appendicular skeleton. And in this part, we are going to learn about two bones. So we're going to start first with the collarbone, which is right up here. And this is known as the clavicle. When you look at the clavicle, you can see it's slightly S-shaped. And if you look at the two ends of it, you will notice that this end is flat in this direction, whereas the other end is flat in this direction. And that is going to be super important for figuring out which end is medial and which end is lateral. So the part that is flat in this direction is the medial end, and we call that portion the sternal end of the clavicle. And so then that makes the part that is flat in this direction the lateral end. And that is called the acromial end of the clavicle. Now, there are other landmarks to the clavicle, but we're not going to learn any others. And instead, we're going to turn our attention to this triangular shaped bone, which is your shoulder blade or your clavicle or your scapula. And when you look at the scapula, what you will notice is one side is smooth, it has a shallow depression or a fossa, and the other side has this big piece of bone that sticks out from it. So that helps you orient anterior from posterior, because your scapula sits next to your rib cage. If these were your ribs here, it only makes sense if the smooth side is the side that could slide up and down. If this part was next to your ribs, it would get caught between the ribs and would not slide. So that makes this the anterior surface of the scapula. Even though it sits back here, it's still considered the anterior surface of the scapula, and this is the posterior surface of the scapula. So let's start first with the posterior aspect. And this piece of bone that is sticking out right here, skinny piece, is called the spine of the scapula. And if you take your fingers and you walk them all the way to the spine of the scapula, you would be holding on right about here. And that is known as the acromion. Okay, so does that word look familiar? Because the acromion is the name for this. And remember, in the clavicle, we had the acromial end, and that is because that flat end of the clavicle articulates right here with the acromial end of the clavicle. So acromial is the adjective form. So it's the acromial end of the clavicle, but on the scapula, it is the acromion, the noun form of the word. Now, if you look at this scapula from this end, what you'll notice is not only do we have the acromion here, but we also have something else sticking out over there. And so that something else that is sticking out is called the coracoid process. Coracoid process. And the coracoid process is not then attached to the spine of the scapula at all. When we look at this part of the scapula, where we clearly can see the acromion and we clearly can see the coracoid process, we then also can see this oval shallow depression right there. And that is known as the glenoid fossa or the glenoid cavity. And this is the part that is going to be articulating or forming a joint with your arm bone or the humerus. So would you expect this part to be medial or to be lateral? Where does your arm do its articulating? Yes. So the arm articulates laterally. I was looking to see if I had a humerus, and I don't have one. The arm articulates laterally. So That means that this cannot be here in the center of your chest, but this has to be at the shoulder area. So knowing that this is anterior and this has to be the shoulder area, that tells us that the one I am holding has to be a left scapula. It cannot be a right scapula because the humerus does not come out of the middle of my chest. Okay. So knowing that this part is lateral, then that tells you that this part is medial. And so this portion of the scapula is known as the medial border of the scapula. Going back posteriorly to the spine of the scapula, above or proximal, because we're not in the extremity, above the spine of the scapula, we have a shallow depression known as the supraspinous fossa. Supra meaning above, spinous meaning it's above the spine. So this area right here in the supraspinous fossa, there is going to be one of your rotator cuff muscles. And then we also have another shallow depression below the spine, and so that's going to be called the infraspinous fossa. So those words make sense. And just to recall that the scapula goes like this in humans, but in our four-legged creatures, it would go like this, which would make what we consider the anterior surface to actually be below the scapula. And so that explains the naming of this part, which is the subscapular fossa. And with that, we are done with the clavicle and the scapula. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.